My next guest is Jean Case, the chair of the National Geographic Society and CEO of the Case Impact Network and Case Foundation. She's also author of the national bestseller. I've got a few copies of it. I love the book. I've read it twice. Be Fearless, 5 Principles for a Life of Breakthroughs and Purpose, and a particular relevance for today's conversation. She's an impact investing pioneer. Jean, it's great to see you. I want to, jump in. There's so many different dimensions we can talk about. We don't have a lot, but I want to talk about impact investing for a minute. I had talked with Judith Rodin. Judith Rodin was a former president CEO of the Rockefeller Foundation, and she was one of the people that began, along with yourself and others, began looking at this arena of impact investing and beginning to shape through financial power, market power, how to sculpt better outcomes for society across a lot of points. Now, a lot of people used to look at this as sort of a boutique thing on the side, feel good. Has it moved to something where we're now seeing scale?
Yeah, well, first of all, Steve, thanks for having me. It's always great to be with you. It is an exciting time because I think there's lots of evidence that the world is waking up to this idea that both business and capital can be powerful forces for good. In the realm of impact investing, and, the more frequently used term these days is ESG investing, in ESG investing, the capital inflows, new investments into that arena grew by 10x before 2020 in just 2 years, 10x. So we're seeing both mainstream investors, retail investors, just a growing demographic of, next gen women, all kinds of folks really coming into this space and saying, how can I use my capital to do much more than just give me a financial return?
Well, Jean, you've been critical of some players in the ESG industry. I won't read the whole thing here, but you've got a great kind of humdinger of a line here at the end. It says, there's a good, bad, and ugly in this, but the ugly is that some go in the name of ESG without clear transparency and measurement to bring confidence to investors, or worse, and using the title to mislead. How much of the scene is that, and how do we tighten up ESG so that it's inclusive of the real world, but yet you're not letting the lowest common denominator define the situation?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important for people to understand that today in the United States, there are no standards that define what goes under ESG. The SEC itself has become quite concerned about this. There have been hearings on the Hill, bill passed in the House just recently, really compelling the SEC to work towards standards. As investors, we need to know that if you're representing something, there's there. But, this is early days, and we've often seen this even with impact investing. People go under the name. In this case, there's some greenwashing going on. And I do say to investors everywhere who are interested either in jumping in or expanding, their investments in these areas, it's a little bit of buyer beware, and you need some tools and resources to kind of figure out the space.
Jean, I've already done it in advance, so I know what it was said, but I've got a really great conversation with Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio coming up in a bit. He said, Steve, people don't know what ESG is. They don't know how to relate to it, that there's a gap between this conversation that we're having here and the public out there. So when we look at environmental sustainability, you look at social issues and, the inclusion and diversity, upskilling people, giving, the wealth gap. You look at governance inside companies. He says, we've got to find other ways to make this real for real people. Do you agree with that? And what would be your recommendations on how we could kind of give this more traction with the American public?
Yeah, I do agree with that to a large extent. ESG was put together, and today, and it is that environmental, social, and governance. Today, if a company is strong on one of them, chances are they're going to get a high ESG rating. So for instance, and I see this in my own investments, you could be a renewable energy company, but because it's a bunch of engineers, which tends to be very male and white driven, you could be horrible on diversity, and yet you're going to get a high ESG. So, we've joked a lot about the letters need to come apart because investors care about different things. They might care more about the environment, more about diversity and inclusion, more about the whole social aspect of what's going on with your employees and your broader stakeholders. So I do think we have to refine, and I think some of that will come out as we try to set standards, which is why I've really been kind of banging the drum on the need for standards.
Jean, you and I know each other. We've kind of been around a lot of the same circles. Do you begin to feel like we're at an inflection point where gender diversity, diversity on where you have the dealing, with a much broader aperture of what it means when we have everybody inside the tent. Is that happening, or is the political world and the economic world so divided, so toxic that we're talking to ourselves? Are there things that we should be doing somehow to create on-ramps to other parts that feel like gravity operates differently from? I don't know how else to put it. I know that you and your husband spent a lot of time in a Winnebago going across parts of the country that a lot of us haven't been to, but what are you feeling out there? Is there a chance to get everybody on the same page, in the same boat? There used to be this idea called civitas, right? Civitas was, we can argue it all out, but we're on the same boat. And I'm wondering what your sense is of the political times we're in.
I think in the realm of entrepreneurs, we don't find that to be a Republican or a Democratic idea. Yes, Steve, you know as well as anyone how divided we are today. But I do think there is an opportunity, to look at our economic system and just ask the honest question about how can it work for more people in more places. That's what we've been focused on, and using kind of a race, place, and gender lens. And this new form of investing can really benefit people in places where they haven't been benefited. And I'll give you an example, because people often say, like, what's an impact company? So we're invested in this company called App Harvest. And, it's a food growing, produce growing company, very innovative. They're using a greenhouse approach. And guess where they are? Right in the heart of Appalachia, in what is really cold country. But by their process of growing food, they use 90% less water, 3 times the yield per acre, and a small carbon footprint, because as they send out their produce, it's available within a 1 day's drive to the majority of the U.S. population. So those kind of companies that are coming along, and particularly when they're coming along in those places where we don't expect such innovation, I think are really starting to change the game. And I think both sides of the aisle are starting to take notice.
I also want to just take a minute and highlight your book, Be Fearless. I took a look at it the other day, because knowing we were going to speak, and it just, every word of it could ring. There's a timelessness to your advice and your counsel to women. And when I first interviewed you at that a few years ago, I just saw women in tears just hearing yes. But I guess, can you share with our audience, because I think there's a kind of need at some level to ask the question of why so many people don't feel empowered, and they need a book like that, and what it does to change the equation so that they feel like they're real stakeholders in their own outcomes.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Steve. And it really was written for anyone, who wants to look at breakthroughs and purpose in their life. And women do have special challenges. And frankly, the challenges they had ahead of the pandemic have been exacerbated during this time of quarantine. As you well know, we've lost nearly 2 million women from the workforce. I wrote the book really as almost a startup guide for those who really want to find that fearlessness. One of the principles, which is one of my favorite, is let urgency conquer fear. And I just want to, say this was not the gospel according to me. This was based on some social science that, we really invested in, that looks at where breakthroughs and lives of purpose become real. One of them is let urgency conquer fear. And I think this time we're living in right now, whether you're a woman, no matter where you are in society, and particularly for those that have been a little more disenfranchised, there is this sense of urgency, this almost burning from within. That can be a beautiful moment when you push through your comfort zone, you take some risks, you really go after some of the big ideas or big dreams that you had. And we're hoping we're already beginning to see some of that coming out of COVID, where people have been spending, this time really assessing their lives and asking the big questions. And I think, the book and the science that we invested in is really a great playbook for anyone who's looking at that.
Are there, you have the Case Impact Network. Are there ways that, I hate to call them small players, but players that have more limited resources, they have maybe a more limited arena for whatever reason, but they want to be impact players. Are there opportunities at that more micro level? One of the things that's really interesting to me, I've been talking to your husband about it, are micro ventures. Is that there's an enormous explosion of entrepreneurship in the country. They may be 1 or 2 person shops on the side of a real job, mainly on digital companies. But you kind of look at that and you ask yourself, well, can there be impact ESG oriented networks at the micro level?
Yeah, and we are seeing some of this. And I would say, there's two demographic shifts that are very significant. Next generation and women coming into the market as investors are looking for these opportunities we've been talking about. But, the investing space, even for pretty experienced investors, can be a little intimidating, right? The language like we just talked about with ESG, what the heck is that, right? All of these acronyms, et cetera. So actually this summer, we're launching a new newsletter specifically targeted at early investors, particularly next gen, to really try to help them grow in comfort and confidence around how they can use their capital to make more than just a financial return, to really address things that they care about most.
Well, I always love spending time with you, and I hate running out of time, but we have. Jean Case, CEO of the Case Impact Network, Chairman of the National Geographic Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Jean.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be with you.